Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So one of our subscribers has asked me to do a video on what to do if you think that you're being influenced by a spirit or have a spirit attachment. And this is a rather huge subject. It's not a very straightforward, like, da da da, this is what you do kind of thing. So, in order to prepare for talking about the subject, I figured we need to start with some of the things that can be confused for a spirit attachment. So the first thing that comes to mind is what we call a larva. Now, larvae are pseudo life forms in the astral plane. I guess that would be the best way to describe them. And they're created whenever you have some kind of an addictive behavior or an addiction to a physical substance. For example, the easiest one to make is tobacco. When a person becomes addicted to the substance of tobacco, this thing is created that feeds off of the addictive substance. So if you are a smoker, you're going to have a larva associated with that. And it may sound gross, and it might be kind of gross, but that's sort of the way these things work. Now, it can be not just that, like a physical addiction, like tobacco or heroin or meth or other types of drugs that are out there. It can also be a behavioral addiction, like sex addicts, somebody who is prone to having some kind of a self-destructive behavior pattern. So, there's a range of things that can create these larvae. Now, the thing to know about them is they're not actually alive in the sense that they have free will, that they can survive without the addiction that the person who created them has, and that's where it can get interesting. So if you have an addiction and you decide to stop the addictive behavior, several things take place. The larvae that feed off of that addictive behavior starts to shrink and also starts to panic. It has I guess I would call it there's a self-survival mechanism that's in play here with the larva. Even though it's not technically alive, it feels its impending destruction. And so then it sort of creates scenarios in order to keep the addictive behavior going, because it knows that once you completely stop that behavior or that substance, they'll shrivel up and die and fall off, and then they won't be feeding on your energy anymore. So what happens, say with tobacco, and you decide to stop smoking? There's just the basic physical addiction that takes place, and that's actually gone within a fairly short period of time. But then what people think of as the emotional addiction to tobacco is actually, in my view, the larva itself, trying to keep the person from giving up the substance. And that can be arranging scenarios, situations, orchestrating stressors that usually the response for the person involved is to start smoking, creating scenarios of social interaction where suddenly you've lost the break that you used to take with your friends that are still doing the substance. And it can, sort of start to bug you, like putting an idea in your head or a picture in your head or having you dream about doing it again. And it's that level that is often the thing that stops someone from succeeding when they've decided they want to stop doing a behavior. So If you want to stop doing the behavior and you suspect that you have created a larva form, there are some things you can do magically to help you. One would be doing a ritual to cut the cords between you and the larval form, making a magical commitment, getting assistance from your spirit guides, knowing the process is going to take some time and know what you're about to face, and having the willpower to see it through. Once you see it through, it doesn't have the ability to sustain itself, and it just shrivels up and falls off your aura. So this is one thing that some people misidentify as having a spirit attachment, because they feel that compulsion to behave a certain way, or they're drawn to certain circumstances that will encourage the behavior. So I'm not sure exactly if there's any other way to explain it or to tell you about it. Those of us that are sensitive enough can sense them, see them, feel them. And if you start going through the process of becoming clear as an individual and clearing out these things away from your aura, you will also discover that people who have those will not like to be around you anymore. It's, again, the other larvae that are out there on the people that haven't kicked an addiction or haven't decided to stop a behavior will sense that you did, and they will see you as a threat. And so you might discover that the friends that you have suddenly don't want to hang out with you anymore, or they feel uncomfortable around you for other, they'll make a reason, manufacture a reason to make it make sense to them. But on a psychic level, what's going on is that irritation that your aura now has to other people who have the same larva that you just got rid of. So there's that. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, this is just sort of a mechanism of how it works in the psychic part of your body, the other parts of your energy field, not just your physical body. And certainly getting assistance on the physical plane to help minimize the actual withdrawal symptoms from getting off of a substance can help. Getting assistance from mental health care practitioners or physicians to give you some bolstering for that. Having a group support for what you're going through from other people that are also trying to stop the addictive behavior. Alcoholism is another good example of that. And that creates its own set of larvae. And again, the same process. Whatever the larva is, the process remains the same. So that's that. Let's see. One of the other things that can be misidentified as being spirit influence are thought forms. Thought forms are a little trickier because we self-generate them all the time. Every time we have a thought, we generate a thought form. Every time someone else has a thought, they generate a thought form. We have groups that create their own thought forms, sometimes on purpose, but mostly by accident. So it's some experiences that I've had with thought forms that could be identified as spirits. When I lived in Santa Cruz, I hadn't been there very long, and some of the earlier people that I met when I lived in that community had a room that they had rented out, and since this one person had left the room, no one else could stay in the room. Everyone who went in there felt uncomfortable. They thought they had a haunting. They asked me if I would go in and see what was going on. So I went in. I sat down and I closed my eyes and opened myself up to see what there was to see. And I found this pretty incredible goddess thought form. And she was very mad. She was very angry at the person who left her there, and sort of showed me what had happened. The individual happened to be a man who went in there to meditate, and his choice was to meditate out the female parts of himself. Why he thought this was a good idea, I have no clue. Something he read or some choice that he made decided him on this path. So he spent many, many hours in that room trying to meditate the female away. And what he ended up leaving behind was this dark goddess form, an angry dark goddess form. And it was fairly simple for me to release it, I guess, would be a way of putting it. All I had to do was to see it and acknowledge it and accept it and praise it. I saw this form and I'm like, wow, you are like incredible. You are the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. He was a fool. I can't understand why he did that. And, you know, and then she was happy and then she disappeared. So that's one example of a thought form that was strong enough for other people to sense when they stayed in the room and made them uncomfortable. But it wasn't a spirit. It wasn't actually a goddess form. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a haunting. It wasn't any of those things that people thought it might be. So that is an example of how that can happen. And I think that thought forms are probably a much more typical experience that people have than actual ghosts or entities and spirits and that kind of thing. Not that they don't happen, because I've certainly encountered my fair share of those. But that is kind of what those are. And when you're trying to clear yourself, those of us who are empaths and sensitives often pick up on other people's thoughts and their energy. Someone thinks at you. I think that this is the basis for telepathy. Somebody thinks a strong enough image at you and you're sensitive enough to pick it up, then you suddenly think of them or you think of what they sent you. This happens often in conversations, especially with people you know well, and you create the same kind of thought forms, and you know, you say a key phrase, even a short version of a key phrase, and then all those thoughts pop up, and then you know what each other is talking about, and to the casual observer it can seem as if you're reading one another's minds. And so, you know, it's not like thought forms are bad in them of themselves. They are just sometimes left over psychic residue in certain situations that then other people might have to deal with. So one of the things you need to do when you're walking this path is to understand what your own thought forms are so that you can recognize them. I think of these things, I don't know how to describe it any other way, as having a flavor, a certain energy that resonates at a certain frequency that I recognize as a specific person outside of myself or as me. And that way it's easier for me to, interpret the information that I get. And one of the things that you can do with other people's thought forms, if you think they're hanging around you, is to ground them out. A threshold guardian spell that we've talked about previously in the psychic self-defense video that's one of the things that it does, is it helps to ground out people's thought forms as they walk under a threshold. And again, if people are really don't want to let go of a specific thought that they have, and it makes them feel uncomfortable when it goes away, then they're just not going to want to come around and hang out with you, because being clear is not what they're really ready for at that point or interested in. We have a cat who's just joined us on the outside of our temple, which was what the sound was. Jumped up on the windowsill just to look and see what was going on.
Heard the voices.
It heard the voices. Cats are like that. So, you can create, like thought forms are they exist on the mental plane, mostly. Some of them have a lot of feelings, so they can be a combination of astral and mental, both. You know, in some cases, if they're a very vivid thought form and you can feel what they feel, then they would have both astral as well as the mental aspects to them. And out in the mental plane, where we do our guided visualizations or our mental travel or creating our astral temples, like they call it, that's more of a mental temple than an astral temple. Anyway, when you're out there, then they become a little more clear, and sometimes your own thought forms can masquerade as entities, guiding spirits. You don't always know the difference between like your higher spirit guardian and a thought form. It's one of those things that as you gain more experience in the other realms, it'll become more clear to you what it is and what it isn't. And having something that doesn't feel anything like you is usually an indication that it's not you, when you know yourself and how you feel to you, kind of thing. So, you know, I've had some various encounters with thought forms. I once went to Big Sur to get away from people in the city to kind of clear my head, because I was going through an extremely sensitive phase at that point. And went out in the middle of the woods and encountered more thought forms than I had any clue were possible to be out in the middle of the woods. And apparently when people are stoned on mushrooms and acid and other mind-enhancing supplements, a lot of times their thought forms get created and they just kind of hang out. I just see them all over the place, grounding them out, trying to get clearer so I could see what else might be going on. That was an adventure in and of itself, of other kinds. So, so when you buy something used, for example, there can be energy attached to it, like the feelings of the person who loved the objects or wore the object a lot or used the object a lot. Their thoughts and energy that are associated with the object can cling to the object, and that can be both good and bad, depending. Example of that would be when we went to Ashland and we were at a park, and there was a vendor there who wasn't actually at his booth at the time, and he had made all these wonderful crystal wands. We're talking glass tubes and crystals on them, and lots of wire wrapping and stuff like that. And they were very beautiful to behold. And of course, me being attracted to all things sparkly and pretty, I went and picked one up. And when I picked up the wand, there was this very dark energy, that's what I saw, coming out of it, and it started climbing up my arm. And I could see that as clear as a bell. And somehow I managed to put it down without breaking it. I'm really quite proud of myself that I didn't just sort of drop the glass object with the crystals on it on the concrete and shatter it into a million pieces. I did get it back controlled enough to put it back in place. But then I had this energy thing that was climbing up my arm. Of course, I told my husband about it, and he touched it too. And then he also had a black energy thing, which I could see climbing up his arm. And I'm like, okay, we need to get this out of here right away. So this is a technique that you can use if you think that some external energy has entered your aura and is, not you, and you don't want it. This just works without any training whatsoever, in my opinion. And that is to get your feet and your hands in some kind of running water. And the running water will serve to pull external influence or external energy out of your body and just take it into the water and make it go away. And so we're in a park, near a park, and I took off my shoes and I jumped in a fountain that was there, a rather large fountain. I just jumped in and put my hands in the water, and I could feel the energy leaving my body. Since I wasn't sure exactly what it was, and it didn't seem like it was a good energy, I wanted to definitely get rid of it, and it left. my husband wasn't comfortable in jumping into the fountain because he was more concerned about what people might think at the time. And I wouldn't touch him because I could see the energy going up his arm, and until he got rid of it. It's like, because I don't want it back, because I'm going to have to jump in the fountain again. And so he went and walked in the creek that was right there, and stepped in the creek and put his hands in the water of the creek, and I could see the energy leaving him and going away. And then after that we were fine. And I wondered what the heck was this energy and why was it there. It was sort of a surprise to pick up a brand new object that no one had used because they had just created it, and what was going on with that. And then later on I learned that the artisan who created these wonderful objects actually was dying of cancer. And so my suspicion is that his feelings about the unfairness of it and the disease and everything else got absorbed in the objects that he made. And crystals, we know, are really good at absorbing energy, and whatever is around can, just sort of enter into them. So I think that's probably what was happening. I never got to completely confirm that hypothesis because I didn't know the gentleman who created them, but it seems like a reasonable assumption in this case. And so it wasn't like he was trying to target me in particular. He didn't know anything about me. He didn't know I was going to be coming to his shop outside and picking up a thing and having it affect me like that. And so, you can encounter these things and they may have nothing to do with you at all. It may not be someone who's wishing you ill or anything like that, because it's just a random thing that happens in the middle of the day. And you can encounter things like that throughout your life that will often surprise you and whatnot. So let's see. There are some things that are just, they have a consciousness. They become conscious. You can have statues that have that happen to them. We have a statue here in our temple, actually, that we rescued a spirit from an artifact that was in a secondhand store, where I walked in to check out the antique shop, and as I walked by this rather large, it was about 3 feet high, head from a Buddha statue, I looked at it and I suddenly got all kinds of images of Chinese soldiers going into a temple and hacking off the head of a statue. Now, the Buddhists, depending on the sect, have different methods for using their statues. And in this particular statue, apparently all the attention of the prayers and the attention and stuff like that they gave the statue made it awake. So it had a form of consciousness. They had created a being, in a sense, that was now part of the statue. And the things that happened to it were violent, and it reacted to it. Now this statue, the head, this Buddha head, had been in our community for probably a couple of years. I found out later at a different shop, and all the people that worked in that shop got sick, and they had to leave the shop and sell all their stuff. And I suspect it was probably because of what was going on with this particular piece that they had. They were not consciously aware of it, but it affected them nonetheless. And so the store it was in, that when I found it, was new in town, and they had purchased all of their stock, and they were actually getting ready to go out of business because no one wanted to be in their store. And so, okay, I'm like, well, I wonder if this is a real thing or not. And it's, if you can get external or independent verification of something you sense like that, it's always a good idea, because then you have a better handle on what's going on, and you're more likely to be correct in your assumptions. So one of the members of our group at the time, I called her up on the phone and I said, hey, why don't you go into that new antique shop downtown and just walk around and see if you feel anything, and then let me know. So I didn't tell her what I sensed, And she walked in and she walked through and she called me back and she says, "Oh my God, that Buddha head." I was like, what the heck is going on there? So I'm like, okay, so I'm probably correct. And I did what I could to try and get it to the right place. I thought a Buddhist temple would be a good place, and I contacted as many of them as I could. That didn't work. And so now I'm left with, I know that there is something negative happening in there, and something needs to be done about it, but the owners of the shop are not open to me coming in there. They think I'm weird, which, is probably true, but whatever. And so we created a plan. In this case, I bought a Buddha statue from a local shop. My husband immediately broke it on the way into the house, which he felt bad about, but I thought was perfect because then we glued it all back together and it made it a one-of-a-kind statue. So we fixed it up so it was working, and I did some research and painted some sacred symbols on it that the spirit would feel comfortable with, would make it a nice house, as making a house for the spirit. And so then me and the woman who was in the group, who helped me find it and verify it, went into the shop, and my daughter actually went in and distracted the owners of the shop, and she and I went and we had the statue in a bag, and we stood in front of the head, and I told it what we were up to and what we had created for it, and we had a place to keep it, and touched the Buddha head and allowed it to travel through us into the statue, which it just was very easy to do. It just instantaneously went in there. And the other woman was worried about potential residue of stuff, so she had done some runes on her heart and on her hand that was going to touch it to protect us. So I wasn't worried, but that was fine by me. A little extra protection never hurts. So this is the Buddha statue that we made for the energy of the Buddha head when we rescued it from the secondhand store. We brought that statue back here to our temple, and it's sitting in here with us right now. And once it got out of where it was happy, and I have to say, lucky for the store owners, they're doing well. They are still in the community, and this was quite a few years ago now, probably 5 years ago, I think. So, when you come across these things, one of the things you have to remember is this may not be, first, what you think it is, and second, you need to be open to what is really going on and think about what can be done, if something can be done. There are sometimes you come across things and your only option is to get out and leave it alone because you don't know what's going on and you want to stay away from that. So that is, just because something is awake and aware doesn't mean it means you harm either. Like in this case, again, the energy coming off of that Buddha head was the energy of the violent act that separated it from the rest of the statue, and that was affecting everyone around it, even though none of those people really knew that it was happening. It affected their health, it affected their business, it affected their lives, and so, there you go. That was that. So each situation is different when it comes to dealing with these kinds of things. Trying to think. So if you think you have a spirit attachment, I would suggest the first thing you do is a good grounding meditation. Get your shields up, do a self-evaluation, and look and see first, are you generating it? Is this some idea that got in your head and then never wanted to leave? Are you facing something in yourself that you don't want to accept, and so you are externalizing that outside of yourself and then having it come back at you because it is a part of you? Is it an object you've brought into the house that something might have either something good or something bad happened around and it absorbed that energy. There are some definite possibilities. There's a lot of different possibilities that things can be. So you need to try and think the situation through and be logical. And then try not to panic. If you think you actually have an attachment, they can't do anything to you that you won't allow. You are in complete and total control over your own energy field. The only thing is you have to take charge of your energy field. So, it can't get in there and do anything to you unless you have a hole in your psyche, in your aura, and on some level think that you need to have this happen to you. I mean, there's, again, a lot of different variety when it comes to this kind of stuff. So the shielding, the grounding, and the shoring up of your own stuff, you can see if you can find someone who is a psychic, a medium, someone who is experienced with sensing energies and what they are, like me. There's lots of us out there, I'm sure. You have to just try and look for them. You also want to check physical things, like how is your wiring? Are you in the middle of an EM field and it's making you feel woozy and uncomfortable or giving you headaches? Because that can happen with an electromagnetic energy field in a house if the wiring is done wrong or if you're sleeping right next to a large source of it. They're weak fields, generally speaking, but sometimes things happen. I've been in some locations where there have been some huge EM fields that there was nothing anybody could do about because, they were like 3 feet high from the source and you were just walking through them all the time. So, look at your environment and see what is going on around that. And then, since these things are everywhere, they're all around us all the time, we have different forms of consciousness and energy that exist side by side with us all the time. The trees in our backyard and, the animals that come and feed on the lawn or fly in the sky. There are forms of awareness and consciousness that are out there that are not human. And that doesn't mean that they're bad either. So, like I said, try not to panic and try to maintain a clear head. It's like you want to look at things and don't be afraid, because fear actually changes these things. When we talked about larva, fear feeds larva. When we talked about thought forms, fear creates thought forms. So if you start to have a lot of fear and anxiety about a situation, you start to worry about it all the time, you'll actually create phenomenon. And these things can get strong enough to throw things around your house. So you do not want to be afraid of them, because there's really nothing they can do without your permission. So I'm going to do some more thinking about the subject, and in the next video maybe talk about some other practical methods that you can use to help with it if you think that there's something there. But I wanted to definitely give you an overview of some of the different things that exist that most of us don't talk about very often. And if you have questions about this specifically, please send them to me, and I will do my best to figure out how to answer your questions. Since I'm just talking to a camera, I don't get the feedback as I'm talking to know whether what I'm saying is making any sense at all. So anyway, this is Siofra Bradigan, and this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove. Blessed be.